hardly the first person to end up in trouble over the use of new technology. My next guest has written 6 books on the legal and cultural implications of social media. Frederick Lane is joining me now to discuss the fallout of Wienergate and how best to avoid falling into the cyber trap. Mr. Lane, it's good to see you.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So this is, I want to say, sort of a boon for you, unfortunately, because you have just come out with a new book, Cyber Traps for the Young, and you believe that this scandal, as bad as it is for Anthony Weiner, actually is a teachable moment for parents.
I really do. I do feel bad for Representative Weiner. I think this is a mistake that a lot of people could fall into. And I did have one of my friends suggest that somehow I should put him on my payroll for the book promotion. But,
oh, yeah.
But that may be a bit over the top. Look, the issue is that when you see something like this, it's obviously something that kids are going to be aware of. There are plenty of kids who are getting into similar trouble themselves. If we're going to make something useful out of this, we should turn it into a teachable moment if we can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually spoke to an assemblyman, Nick Perry, this week, who talked about the dangers of sexting, right? That's part of what went on here, which is sending images, explicit images, pornographic images, really, over your cellular phone and messages. And he advocates actually for kids, for people who are minors, that there should be actually a little bit of leeway and not be really charging them as holding pornography. Do you agree with that?
I actually do. I think that we need to be very clear as a society that this is not okay behavior under any circumstances, but we do need to take into account the fact that kids are less experienced. They don't necessarily have the judgment that we expect adults to have, and we also need to recognize that many of the laws that were written to handle child pornography, for instance, were really aimed at adults who were preying on kids. And it's a different situation where you've got kids interacting with other kids. By way of example, last year up in Vermont, they changed the child pornography laws so that prosecutors in that state have discretion as to whether or not to divert a case into juvenile court, which is important because that takes away the potential for sex offender registration.
Yeah.
And that can have a huge impact on a child's life.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem here, obviously, is that kids are using this kind of medium all the time, and you just can't police them 24 hours a day. You might be able to put a lock on a computer and block out some kinds of content, but you can't do the same on a cell phone, can you?
It's much more difficult. There are definitely restrictions that you can put on cell phone use. A number of companies are beginning to develop software which will automatically, for instance, send copies of text messages or photos to your phone. So that, right, and keep in mind, of course, that the average girl is sending 4,300 text messages a month. So you need to think about what you're asking for. But look, the fundamental point of cyber traps for the young is communication and education. Yep. It really is something that needs to start long before kids start using electronics. Although I do note in the book, by the way, that there are 24 digital cameras aimed at the 2 to 4 age group on Amazon. So our society is really going wild with this stuff.
You know, it's interesting. You mentioned how this is sort of a broad new area of technology that the laws are just trying to catch up with. That's also going to be a problem with the House ethics investigation because, you know, the House rules don't speak anything about Twitter.
No, of course not.
Right.
No, I mean, some of those ethics rules date back to the 19th century, and they're not going to have any idea about this.
No.
And look, it's pretty clear that congressmen themselves have a pretty thin grasp of this whole thing themselves. So the question you're really facing is, are we able to educate legislators as well and get them up to speed so that they can draft laws that make sense? So
what your number one, you have a number of 5 actually of talking points for parents that they could use with their kids when they're talking about the dangers of online communication. The first is, it's way too easy to be stupid online. This seems like a no-brainer, but actually what happened with Anthony Weiner when he tweeted that first crotch shot, if you will, picture that he said he was hacked and then later came to say that he actually had sent it. He just mistook one key for another. That's all it took.
It was just one simple character.
Yeah.
That's right.
How does that work?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. The way it works is that when you are sending a direct message to someone, which is what Representative Weiner wanted to do, you type the characters DM in front of the username so that you know that the message is going to the right person. Instead, he typed the @ symbol, which in the Twitter universe is basically a signal that you're talking about someone, but the message you're sending goes into the general Twitter feed. And that's exactly what happened with that infamous crotch shot. And the upshot of it was that he tried to delete the message and was simply incapable of doing so.
Right.
So the result was that that one mischaracterization, that one mistype, caused this entire thing to escalate.
Well, but also you note, look, it's too easy for people to find out. I mean, the brief moment between the time that he realized that he had done this and the time he tried to get rid of it, someone else was clearly monitoring his feed and caught it and froze that frame, and then it's out there. There's really, you can't take it back.
No, that's exactly right. And the specific point there, as congressmen are finding out, is that there are all kinds of folks who monitor their feed on a regular basis. And so everything that they put out is almost instantly copied.
Well, there's a site actually that does it. There's an official congressional site that monitors every single tweet that every congressman is sending out. And so you should know, you should probably be aware of that before you send things out. The other thing is, and look, just today we're seeing reams of emails being released that Sarah Palin sent when she was governor of Alaska. 29,000 emails. It's boxes and boxes of emails. There have been emails that I have sent as a reporter to various members of the administration, not the Cuomo administration, the Spitzer administration, during scandals, asking for questions that were subsequently foiled and have been released to the public.
Sure. And, well, and keep in mind that that shot that Representative Weiner sent will now be part of the Library of Congress archives.
Oh, wow.
Because they're archiving the entire Twitter feed as part of an agreement with Twitter. So he is now, permanently memorialized in our national archive.
Well, and on every, for a week, about tabloid newspaper front page with many interesting headlines. I want to ask you, though, as an expert, and do you tweet yourself?
Pretty rarely. I do it probably 3 or 4 times a week. One of the things that does happen, and you have to be careful about this, is that it's very easy to link together social networking sites. So initially, for instance, when I set up my Facebook account, it was feeding stuff automatically to Twitter and vice versa, and that actually became really annoying more than anything else. So you have to pay attention to where your information is flowing. It actually takes a little bit of thought, and that's what really kids need to learn. And
just before we run out of time, I want to ask you, do you still think, I mean, obviously you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Twitter is here to stay. YFrog, which is that area where you can post photos and then subsequently share them. Facebook, who knows what's coming down the pike, all sorts of things that people are going to be walking around with. Do you still believe that these are valuable?
Absolutely. I think they're tools like anything else. Cars are valuable, knives are valuable. They certainly can cause a lot of damage if they're misused. I don't think that's really the issue. The issue when we're dealing with new technology and we're dealing with new legal issues is education, and that's really what we need. Obviously, it doesn't always prevent problems. Representative Weiner is very well educated on technology. Mistakes will happen, but the more education we can give kids from an early age forward, the less likely it is that they'll wind up on the front page of the Post. Well,
I want to thank you very much for coming from Vermont to join us, actually. The name of the book is Cyber Traps for the Young. It's actually out now, if you would just tell people where they could find it.
2 places. You can go to NTI/Cybertraps, which is the publisher, or you can also find a link on my website, FrederickLane.wmv.
Mr. Lane, it's been great talking with you. Thanks very much.
You too. Thank you.
Great. Hold on, I'll be right up.